Tonight on Reporting Scotland. The First Minister and the Prime Minister hold talks at Downing Street. So, are they any closer to agreeing on Brexit? The mother of a teenager who took her own life says her daughter wasn't given the mental health support she needed.
So many things, there are so many what ifs. But if she'd got the help she needed then, maybe she'd still be here.
Also in the programme. Can Scotland show leadership on climate change? We examine the issue being discussed at the special UN conference in Bonn. Family of a man being held in India claim he's been tortured by police. And Scotland's most northerly island bids to become a launch base for the satellites of tomorrow. Good evening. The First Minister and the Prime Minister are still on a collision course over Brexit, despite a face-to-face meeting today aimed at breaking the deadlock. Speaking after the talks, which Nicola Sturgeon described as constructive and cordial, she said she still couldn't back the current EU withdrawal bill because of the lack of clarity over how powers coming back from Europe would be distributed. Theresa May reiterated Holyrood would gain a significant increase in decision-making powers. Well, their talks came as MPs debated the bill at Westminster. Our political correspondent Nick Eardley's report contains some flash photography.
A First Minister who disagrees with much of the UK's Brexit strategy arrives for talks with a Prime Minister battling to get her plans through Parliament. How we leave high on Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon's agenda, along with how to tackle sexual harassment in politics. Afterwards, this from the First Minister.
That was a better meeting. It was certainly better than some of the meetings we've had previously. As I said before, it was cordial, it was constructive, and I think we were both able to set out quite frankly our positions on the withdrawal bill. Now, that doesn't mean agreement will follow, but perhaps it provides the conditions now for reaching agreement in the period ahead.
A Downing Street spokesperson said the Prime Minister had reiterated there will be a significant increase in powers for the Scottish Government after Brexit and encouraged the Scottish Government to secure the best outcome. This afternoon, MPs got back to scrutinising legislation to transpose EU law into UK law on Brexit Day. But this document makes it clear just how many concerns different MPs have. 200 pages of amendments on everything from the powers the bill would give ministers to change the law to concerns it could undermine the Scottish Parliament. And with a tiny working majority, some unhappy backbenchers and opposition parties with numerous concerns, the government knows fighting all of these off is a huge ask. So as detailed scrutiny got underway, ministers said their plans were essential to ensure laws continue to function.
The Government has always been clear that the purpose of the EU withdrawal bill is to ensure that the UK exits the EU with certainty, continuity and control. This is an essential bill in the national interest.
A key Scottish interest here is which powers go to Holyrood. Scottish Tories want a compromise, respecting devolution without harming the UK, but others want guarantees in the bill.
Without doubt, this bill is selling the whole of the United Kingdom short. In Scotland, we need the powers to come back to Scotland where they can be used to make for a better country.
We have to make sure that what we get out of this is a framework which can work for all of the UK, and that we strengthen Scotland's position and we strengthen devolution.
What I'd really like to see is, because the government doesn't know what it's doing on this, go back to the drawing board. It's a parliament of minorities. Reach out to the devolved administrations, reach out to the other political parties.
Analysis of the impact on devolution will be part of detailed scrutiny over the coming weeks. MPs don't want to be rushed, but the Brexit process shows no sign of slowing down. Nick Eardley reporting Scotland, Westminster.
The mother of a teenage girl who took her own life after absconding from residential care has criticised the lack of mental health support for her daughter. Libby Toledo had severe mental health issues as well as autism and ADHD. The 17-year-old's body was found in a scrapyard in Kirkcaldy 10 days after she was reported missing. These are Summers reports.
In a lot of ways she was just like any other 17-year-old kid. She wanted to be out with her friends and shopping for shoes, and you know, sometimes I can look at a picture of her and smile. Another time I just can't cope with it.
Judy Toledo takes things day by day. In September, her daughter Elizabeth, or Libby as she was often known, took her own life. She had a history of mental health illness, first apparent in childhood. Her challenging and sometimes violent behaviour meant she spent most of her youth in care, but she was close to her mum.
Every morning I wake up thinking, okay, everything's fine, and then just that realisation that it's not, and it's never going to be fine. And so much anger, because this was preventable.
In 2014, Libby ran away from her foster carer. She made a determined attempt to take her own life. She spent 9 hours in hospital, but was then discharged. Her mum can't understand why she was not admitted to a mental health provision.
A psychiatric nurse did come in and evaluate her, and it was her that flagged up there may be some autism here.
But not that she needs some inpatient care?
No. It was never brought up.
How does that make you feel?
Furious. Furious. So many things, there's so many what ifs. But if she'd got the help she needed then, maybe she'd still be here.
From then, Libby lived in a series of care facilities. None were psychiatric units. In September, her body was found here in Kirkcaldy. She had absconded from care. She took her own life. Neither NHS Tayside or Angus Council would comment on her case, but expressed sympathy to Libby's family. Charities that work with people at the most extreme end of mental health issues say sadly stories like Libby's are not uncommon.
It simply is a discrimination against them. They're really good professionals in Scotland. There's a lot of expertise and we know how to care and support for these children and how to get really good outcomes for them. So it's not a problem that we don't have the treatment and the knowledge to support them. The problem is we simply have put them at the back of the queue.
Scotland has no secure inpatient psychiatric wards for children. That means locked wards. There are only 48 inpatient beds for young people in the whole country, and there's no specialist psychiatric provision for children with autism. This past week, the government has accepted recommendations that more specialist and secure care is needed.
We are working hard in this field through the new mental health strategy. We've a number of actions that would make sure that young people are getting the right support at the right time, particularly in times of crisis.
Elizabeth always wanted to help. She just wasn't able to save herself. But if I can help prevent one young person ending their own life, then she'll have done some good.
Lisa Summers, reporting Scotland, Brecon.
And details of organisations offering information and support are available at bbc.co.uk/actionline. Or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information on 08000 159 774. The police watchdog, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary, Derek Penman, has announced he's to retire at the end of March. It follows allegations that his senior aide has made a complaint of unreasonable behaviour against him. This is the latest problem for the police service, with the Chief Constable facing 3 separate investigations into bullying allegations and the chair of the Scottish Police Authority, which oversees the force, also stepping down early. Hundreds of teacher training places have not been taken up. New data from the Scottish Funding Council has confirmed that more than half the training places for maths teachers are empty. Meanwhile, 7 out of 10 secondary school teacher training places have been filled. A man from Ayrshire who raped his former girlfriend while on bail for another sex attack on her has been jailed for 10 years. His victim later took her own life. 27-year-old Ryan Graham was convicted of assaulting the 34-year-old woman at a house in Irvine last March, despite bail conditions not to go near her. Graham is now on the sex offenders register. The First Minister is on her way to Germany this evening to take part in the United Nations Climate Conference. The event is looking at how individual countries can meet a collective commitment to limit global temperature rises. So what part, realistically, can a small nation like Scotland play in that process? Well, our environment correspondent Kevin Keane is in Bonn. Kevin.
Jackie, negotiations have been underway here for more than a week already, and they'll continue for several more days to come before any kind of an agreement is reached. And the point of them, as you say, is to try and create some kind of a framework for that historic Paris Agreement, where the whole world united in this pact to limit global temperature rises. Over the course of the next year, between this and the next one of these conferences, each individual country will set out exactly what it will do to contribute towards that global effort. But we've been looking at what Scotland's part will be in all of that.
It's an easy hit, but an important one too. Increased tree planting requires no behavioural change from you and me, but with each one soaking up the carbon we emit, this is just one way the Scottish Government is tackling climate change.
At the end of the day, if we can plant all these forests, we'll combat climate change, we'll create a nicer environment for everyone, and we'll support rural employment.
But the problem is much bigger than tree planting, and that's why world leaders are gathered here in the former West German capital to chart a way forward.
Scotland is quite unusual for having a political consensus for tackling climate change. In other more protectionist nations, it tends to be much further down the order of priorities. And so the part our political leaders tend to play at events like this is in influencing those more reticent countries to demonstrate ambition.
So how are we doing?
People are looking to Scotland, they're looking for leadership. These are bleak times in many ways, with the rise of the right and, the very real impacts of climate change being already felt all around the world. So nations and people's movements, they're looking for leadership. And if Scotland can step up and provide some of that, then all the better.
Scotland might be high on ambition, but in other areas it's being left behind. Here they're keen to make this conference carbon neutral, with electric buses ferrying delegates. Back home, take-up of electric vehicles is slow, with one of our nearest neighbours, Norway, leading the way.
There is no country doing more than Norway to electrify transportation, and transportation is a really big consumer of oil. So in a way, we're undermining our biggest economy, our biggest economic sector. Then we're spending considerable amounts of our oil income towards national and international climate action.
Beside the conference, consignments of coal on the Rhine act as a reminder of how far we are from dumping fossil fuels. But the whole point of the talks is to make that ambition a reality.
And Kevin, as you say, some talks have been underway for several days, but the high-level talks begin tomorrow.
Yes, that's right, and Nicola Sturgeon is involved in that final stage of this process. Normally the First Minister's role would be confined, as it has been in previous years, to the states and regions talks, and they take place in the middle weekend of this conference, so the weekend just passed. But this year she's received an invitation from the UN Secretary General to take part in one of these high-level events. She'll be involved in that tomorrow, and in fact sharing a stage with the Secretary General, and it also means that she arrives on the same day here as the likes of the French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. So in that sense it's a bit of a coup for Nicola Sturgeon, and perhaps some are suggesting a reflection of the ambitions that Scotland has been demonstrating in trying to tackle climate change.
Thank you very much. Kevin Keenan-Vaughan there. The family of a man from Dumbarton being held in India say he's been tortured by police. Jack Tar Singh Johal has been detained in connection with financing weapons used to kill prominent Hindu leaders. The 30-year-old's family say he's innocent and went to India to get married. The Foreign Office has requested access to Mr Johal and says it takes allegations of torture very seriously. Katie Hunter reports.
Flanked by armed police with much of his face covered, this is 30-year-old Sikh activist Jack Tar Singh Johal from West Dumbartonshire. The BBC understands these pictures were filmed in court this morning, but we haven't been able to independently verify the footage. The 30-year-old has been detained in the state of Punjab for 10 days in connection with financing weapons used to kill Hindu leaders. His family say Mr Johal went to India to get married last month and is entirely innocent.
Today, Jack Tar met his legal team for the first time after 10 days, and he declared to the legal representative on his behalf that he was subject to torture on the first 3 days, and this torture he was subject to was being electrocuted. This wedding has turned out to be a wedding from hell. He has been framed, and the British authorities need to intervene and assist of bringing him back to the UK.
Tar Singh Johal was born in Scotland and has lived in this West Dumbartonshire street for 15 years. Jagtar's family here in Dumbarton are waiting anxiously for updates from India. They're too upset to speak on camera, but say they're angry with the British authorities for failing to do more to help. Speaking outside court, Mr Johal's lawyer said there is no evidence to prove the charges against him. The Foreign Office says staff have requested consular access from the Indian authorities so they can be assured of Mr Johal's welfare, adding they take allegations of torture very seriously. Mr Johal's supporters says the British authorities must do more.
We are calling for the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson to personally intervene, as with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, through the British High Commission, to directly raise this as a priority case and put upon the Indian authorities to call for his immediate release and return to the UK.
Mr Johal's family says he's due to appear in court again on Friday. Katie Hunter, reporting Scotland.
The Justice Secretary has announced the next steps in establishing an expert group to tackle sexual offending among young people. Michael Matheson said it'll be chaired by Catherine Dyer, who led a previous review of child protection. The Scottish Youth Parliament and Youth Link will represent young people's views. There are growing concerns at the soaring number of cyber sex crimes involving young people. A flu outbreak has forced the closure of a ward at Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary. Infection control measures have been put in place to prevent the spread to the rest of the hospital. Ward 9, which is for general medical admission, has been closed to new patients and transfers. Routine visiting is also suspended. It's 7:15. A reminder now of tonight's main story. The First Minister and the Prime Minister hold talks at Downing Street. So are they any closer to agreeing on Brexit? And still to come, locked in and cut off moves to stop prisoners using mobile phones for criminal activities. There's a row tonight over the impact of Holyrood income tax changes. The Independent National Audit Office estimated that 500,000 Scots would pay more tax than people in England this year. But that was withdrawn after the figures were disputed. Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Brian Taylor. So, Brian, why the confusion over this?
It started as a relatively dry set of stats from the NAO. They reckoned that in the current year, 17-18, some 507,000 people in Scotland would be paying more than they would if they were in England because of changes to the higher rate tax threshold. Now, the Scottish Government figure has always been less than that. They reckon it's 368,000. Their officials duly pointed that out to the NAO, and the report was hastily withdrawn late last night, but not in time to prevent it being a dominant story on many of the newspaper front pages this morning. Now, in itself, that's a contentious question, but you know what? This is a proxy for a far bigger row to come, which is over potential changes to tax rates and bans for the year ahead. The Conservatives getting in with their fight in advance of that, if you like, accused the Scottish Government of manipulating the figures. They said they were bullying the NAO to try and cover up the truth. The Scottish Government pointed out in response that their figures are actually in line with those used by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and they described the claims from the Conservatives as, quote, complete and utter nonsense.
Brian Taylor, thank you. MSPs have voted to grant the Scottish Prison Service greater powers to cut the illicit use of mobile phones in jail. It'll now be possible for the prison authorities to block phones and ask the courts to have them permanently removed from the network. Our Home Affairs correspondent Reva Larson reports.
The first mobile phones in the 1980s weighed up to £4, difficult to hide. Now, as technology has changed rapidly, phones and their SIM cards are considerably smaller. Prison staff and their dogs do their best to intercept phones. Since 2013, 1,500 have been seized at the gates and inside jails. Killer John Reid used his mobile phone to post this picture from jail online. It outraged his victim's family, but phones in prisons can also cause further problems.
Prisoners could use mobile phones to continue their criminal activity while they're behind bars in the community. So it could be to organise criminal activity which is involved in drugs, or it could be involved in violence. And what we want to do is to make sure that they don't have access to mobile phones.
MSPs voted to give the prison service new powers to track mobile phone use, to help them confiscate them, and crucially, to go to court to ask providers to remove phones from the network. Because prison officers know the few phones which do get into jails become very valuable.
If one gets into the establishment, those that have them will make good use of it in terms of providing it or renting it out to other prisoners, and obviously extorting a bit of exchange of favours in some shape or form for that.
Like most people, Pete White uses his mobile frequently. He's an ex-convict, now running a charity campaigning for prisoners to have better legal access to the outside world, although he supports the new law.
There's a tremendous scope for having far better contact between people in prison and their families and friends. That would help them on a journey towards no further offending. But I also think it's important to make sure it's done responsibly, and the people who are using phones illegally inside prisons are not acting responsibly on behalf of the wider public.
The prison service said equipment blocking mobile phone signals from jails is unlikely to affect other users outside, but could play a big part in cutting crime. Reva Larson reporting, Scotland.
Football now, and a development in the search for a new national team manager. The Scottish FA has been discussing possible successors to Gordon Strachan, and it appears they've identified their top target. Well, our senior football reporter Chris McLaughlin is at Hampden. So, what can you tell us, Chris?
Well, Jackie, Gordon Strachan was moved on as national manager last month. Since then, an SFA working party has been compiling a list of potential successors. Now, at the very top of that list is the Northern Ireland manager, Michael O'Neill. Perhaps no real surprise, he led Northern Ireland to Euro 2016, just narrowly missed out on guiding them to the World Cup next year as well, taking them all the way to the playoff stages. Now, the former Hibs midfielder lives in Edinburgh. He is absolutely keen on the job, is my understanding. There would be some compensation to be paid because he recently signed a new 4-year deal with Northern Ireland. Also suggestions of some clubs interested in taking him on board as well. But the Scottish FA are ready to make their move. They have one criteria, Jackie, to get someone who can get Scotland to Euro 2020. And they believe that that man is the Northern Ireland manager, Michael O'Neill.
We'll wait and see. Chris, thank you very much. The UK Space Agency has identified the Shetland Isles as an ideal location for satellite launches into space. Its plans involve sending objects into orbit from the most northerly island of Unst. John Johnson can tell us more.
Unst. It's Scotland's most northerly island. It may be rugged and remote, but it's aiming to be at the forefront of space-age technology.
The geography and the physics around Shetland make it the most attractive and the #1 site. This is because we're the most furthest north, the airspace is clear, and the launch providers can get the most efficient trajectory to the various orbits that are required.
Scotland's space industry is growing. Over 7,000 people are employed in it, and it's worth over £130 million to the economy. A number of high-tech companies in Glasgow are already building satellites. The first was launched in July 2014 on board a Russian rocket.
There are more spacecraft built in Glasgow than anywhere else in Europe just now. So we can build them, we can operate them, and we can exploit the data that comes from them and the services that come from them. But in order to get them into space, we've got to go overseas, we've got to go outside of Europe to do that. So what we're seeking to do here is to become the first place in Europe to have that ability to launch spacecraft into orbit, and that will give us that missing link here within Scotland.
A new space bill going through Westminster will see licences being granted to launch satellites from the UK. But Shetland isn't alone in the race for space. It's bidding alongside sites in Caithness, Argyll and in the Western Isles to be the UK's answer to Cape Canaveral. John Johnston reporting Scotland, Shetland.
Still with atmospherics, here's the weather.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and a very good evening to you. Well, at this time of year, we do see some beautiful but early sunsets. This one captured just north of Glasgow here. And actually a lot of dry weather this evening as we lose any rain from the far southwest. But all eyes up to here as we're looking at some fairly blustery, squally showers feeding in for a time tonight with a strong to gale force westerly wind. But they die away, the winds ease as well. Then it's a largely dry night with clearing skies, and we will see a bit of a frost in some rural parts. Temperatures falling to freezing, and elsewhere around about 4 Celsius in our towns and cities, and we may well see 1 or 2 mist or fog patches forming by morning. Now, I think the main focus of any fog would be through the central lowlands and through the Highlands, so we could see some fog first thing, but a dry start. Plenty of sunshine as well from first light, but then we start to see cloud building along the west coast as we head through the afternoon, a sign of things to come. But actually, it's going to be a lovely day for the Northern Isles. It'll be dry, there'll be sunshine as well, sunshine turning more hazy during the afternoon. Similarly for the far north and the northeast, but here's that rain just pushing into the Western Isles, if you can see it there, along with strengthening southerly winds along the west coast, and cloud tending to build along the west coast as well. Elsewhere, it's a dry picture, temperatures up to around 9-10 Celsius at best. So all in all, I think during daylight hours, pretty much a nice day. So as we head towards dusk tomorrow, again the dry conditions hold, but meanwhile we'll see that rain starting to gather force across the Western Isles and the northwest, becoming heavier and more persistent, and it will do overnight. But during the evening it stays largely dry, but then we'll see that weather front approaching, the rain quite squally in nature. It's a band of rain crossing the country with strong winds associated with it, touching gale force across the far north, so a period of wet and windy weather during the overnight period. But then on Thursday, here it is first thing in the south, it clears away fairly quickly, and then it's a dry picture but brightens up, good sunny spells. We'll see some blustery showers in the north, still some brightness coming through here, but I think the thing you will notice about Thursday is it's turning that bit colder. Then on Friday, some frequent showers for the west and north, quite windy here, plenty of sunshine for the south and east. That's your forecast.
Thank you very much, Judith. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. The First Minister and the Prime Minister are still on a collision course over Brexit, despite a face-to-face meeting today aimed at breaking the deadlock. Nicola Sturgeon described the talks as constructive and cordial, but said she couldn't back the current EU withdrawal bill. Theresa May reiterated Holyrood would gain a significant increase in decision-making powers. MPs are discussing the bill at Westminster. And at least 460 people are now known to have been killed by Sunday's earthquake on the border between Iran and Iraq. Officials have called off the rescue operation, saying it's unlikely that more survivors will be found. There have been more than 200 aftershocks in the area since the earthquake. And that's Reporting Scotland for now. We'll have our next main update, which is just after the 10 o'clock news. Join us at 10:25. Until then, from everyone in the team across the country, goodbye.